Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the City of Gloucester Zoning Board of Appeals special meeting of December 21st, 2020. Consistent with the governor's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and banning gatherings of more than 10 people, this meeting will be conducted by remote participation to the greatest extent possible. For the record, this is zoning meeting ID 827-3869-6546. I recognize in attendance Catherine Schlichty, Michael Nyman, Peter Canavo, and Adria Pratt, and myself, Joe Parisi. So we do have a quorum, and we'll begin the meeting. I received one communication besides the, I'm not sure everybody got this, but this was from Meridian verifying that the sewer flow testing that we had asked for them to do a capacity on is complete. And according to this, everything's in line. There's enough capacity for the project. So that's probably the last thing we were waiting for. Now I'd like to continue the petition of Young Men's Christian Association of the North Shore seeking a special permit, a comprehensive permit, to allow the demolition of the building and construction of a new building with 44 apartments for seniors aged 62 and over at 71 Middle Street. Stephanie, I did receive, and I forwarded the updated waiver requirements and decision.
Okay.
Where are we at?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Deborah Ellison, Ellison Law Office, 63 Middle Street. Before we begin, could I make one correction to a statement that was made at the last hearing?
Sure.
There was a discussion as to when there were services at the temple, and it was our understanding that there were no services on Saturday evening, but that's not correct. They do have services Saturday evening. So we have agreed to change the condition that on Saturdays work will stop at 4 and not 5. I just wanted to make the record clear.
I thought I knew my Old Testament better.
Apparently.
Thank you. Stephanie, where are we at? We were about page 14 going through the decision. Are we still there? Or we
That's right. Mr. Chairman, we are there. If I could share my screen, there are just a few. I think that, so after the last hearing last Thursday, Attorney Ellison and I exchanged revised drafts based on our notes from the meeting and then just slight wordsmithing. And I think pretty much all of them are in accordance with what the board had agreed upon or the intent with smoother wording. There are just a couple that I will just highlight before we reach page 14, pretty limited. So, and then we can work through the rest of the document then, if that works with you.
Great. Are you able to share?
Let me, one moment and let me try. I think I have to be allowed to, so let me know.
Allison?
You should be all set.
Okay, just popped up. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just working with Bill right now. I'll be
Yep, no problem.
listening.
Actually, Deb, do you have yours more handy? It's not popping up on my, where it should be on the file. I transferred it over from my work file to my general screen and it's not showing up here.
I do have it handy and I can
Okay.
share my screen.
Okay, Allison, could we transfer the screen sharing capabilities to Deb?
I think I have it.
You should be able-
Everybody has screen sharing
Okay.
capabilities.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the first point that I just want to point out is it's within the section 2, the decision and conditions for approval. And Deb, if you could scroll down to, I believe it's page 9. Yes, thank you. So paragraph 2 that you can't see, the lead in is before any building permit is issued by the building department, the applicant shall have filed the following documents or completed the following actions. And so I'm drawing the board's attention to paragraph G, that it would be that and this involves what we had been talking about, the code review versus whether or not there would be any need for an engineer review, a separate engineering review. So as drafted, you can see it, but I'll read it to you. The final plans shall be subject to a third-party code, building code and fire code review, called third-party code review. Applicant shall be responsible for payment of such third-party code review and shall make payment directly to the entity undertaking such review with evidence of payment submitted to the board. Now it's this next sentence that the board should weigh in on, or the next half of the paragraph. Should the board determine that third-party engineering services are necessary either prior to or during construction, called the engineering review, the applicant shall deliver to the city treasurer an initial deposit of $10,000 into an escrow account established pursuant to general laws, chapter 44, section 53G, the escrow account for such engineering review. And this initial review, or this initial deposit, pardon me, shall not be interpreted as limiting the amount of such fees. The escrow account shall be replenished upon request, and failure to do so shall be grounds for the inspector of buildings to order all construction activities to cease until the account is replenished. So in that paragraph, what the board had discussed and what Attorney Ellison and I had worked on was the part dealing with third-party code review that dealt with building code, fire code, and that the applicant directly pays that to the reviewer, and then just to close the loop would provide documentation to the board. But then it was also raised at the last hearing to the extent that there may be engineering review that comes up. And I just wanted the board to weigh in if the balance of that paragraph, if that meets their understanding that they were talking about last Thursday.
I guess my question would be, if there was future engineering review needed, wouldn't that be past the board's part of this equation and more driven by city engineering or DPW or building department?
I think the question had been, because the board hadn't engaged a peer review so far in the process, if they determined after the fact when they were reviewing the final plans that were going to be the approved plans, if they thought that there was a need for the expertise of third-party review. If there was a concern that perhaps you needed additional outside technical expertise.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Bill.
if I understand what Stephanie's saying, if some issue came up during construction and a dispute arose and some of the city departments had to, or were requesting for an engineer third party to come in to look at something, and we couldn't resolve it, it would go back to the board and the board would decide whether or not to act on this. Is that what we're saying here?
How the paragraph is currently drafted, it really has the applicant delivering the escrow account right now before a building permit issues. And so it's there if the board then, if there is an issue, right, and the board needs to retain someone to review the plans or review whatever the sticking point is in the process.
Okay, the other question here is you had payment, evidence of payment submitted to the board. But once the board issues this 40B, their process is usually, that's the end of their process, and everything usually comes through the building department for anything like that, plans such as this evidence of payment, that would all be done, submitted to the building department to show it. So should that be corrected, or is that just a technicality?
I think that's really what the preference of the board is. If it, from an informational point of view, I understand what you're saying, that you would really want to know that, as opposed to the board, because in order to say the building permit can issue. So it can easily change that. We can include both, make it the board and the building inspector, or just make it, the proof of payment shall be provided to the building inspector.
Yeah, because I agree. Once we issue this comprehensive permit, the only time we would ever want to see it back before us is if they were asking to be able to change something in the decision, whether it was because they figured out they couldn't do it, it was too expensive, and they wanted to know if we'd go along with something reduced or a change in materials or something like that. I think that would be the only time it would ever come back to the board. And then I guess if the change request required third-party engineering advice, that would be like the only time I could see us doing that. So I guess maybe keep it in, but include the building department in the evidence of payment and all
Okay.
that.
Mr. Chairman. if
Joe, I like what you, yeah, I just like what you're saying, Joe. I concur.
Attorney
Mr.
Ellison?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Deborah Ellison. The way I was reading the second part of this paragraph was that the $10,000 would not be contributed unless and until there was a requirement for third-party engineering services. We wouldn't really want to have an escrow account that's just sitting there for however long it's going to take this project to be completed. We're happy if we do need engineering review down the road to do an escrow, but we wouldn't want it to have to sit there for what could be 3 or 4 years.
Well, I agree. I don't think we need to tie up that money as long as it's worded in such that if such review is required, before anything can be done, the funds will be deposited in an escrow account. Does everyone on the board agree with that?
That was how I understood this paragraph. So if the language isn't clear enough, I would say just clear up the language. But I like the idea. Again, I think that's what it should be. We shouldn't make them put $10,000 and leave it there for the next 3 or 4 years. No, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree.
So just a suggestion again, if I may. I would like to see some way in this paragraph that would trigger that the $10,000 had to be put in the escrow account if that need arise, such as, if upon order of the building inspector, the $10,000 we put into an escrow account after determining the need was somehow arisen. Or it can be anybody, but I just want to make sure, we don't get into a problem and things go downstream and we're trying to figure out how to resolve a problem, and then we're arguing about how to get the money put in. That's all. I'm just trying to think of problems that may come up. I'm sure they won't, but just to have those out of the way.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Deborah again. I think that the first phrase covers that. Should the board determine that third-party engineering services are necessary, either prior to or during construction, the applicant shall deliver the deposit. If that should be the building inspector versus the board, I think that's certainly up to you, up to the board, what they want.
Could be and or. Let's say the building inspector or the board, because like I say, it could come back to the board if there was a request for a change. So we both should have the ability to trigger that. But no, we don't need the money up front, that's for sure.
And I don't have a problem with both being listed.
All righty.
Okay, just 2 points then I would suggest. One, I would suggest moving that sentence into somewhere else in the conditions and not have it tied in then to the issuance of a building permit. Just, I don't want it to get confused.
Sure.
And then the second one is, do you want a time frame in terms of when the applicant is to deliver the money? Like, shall deliver within 14 days of a request.
I would suggest as long as we could order I could order the job stopped until it happens. I don't think we need a time limit on it. If it got to that point, we'd stop work until they did it. You know what I mean?
That's a pretty good club. I would agree. That's a pretty good club.
I'm sure we won't get to that point, but
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just a suggestion, it might make sense at the beginning of that sentence, should the board determine whether or not that becomes just a new letter. It's kind of a different topic. It's a different type of fee that, you know, or might be assessed. So maybe it makes sense to just put that as the next lettered item.
and that was Greg, right?
Yep. Sorry for Allison's sake, Greg Kedamatori, Planning Director.
Thank you.
And Stephanie Kiefer, just picking up on Greg's comment, I think that actually it may want to be in a different section because that paragraph 2 discusses things to be completed or filed prior to issuance of a building permit. So we'll make it a new section or a new numbered paragraph, but not in that section 2 there, if that makes sense. Okay. If there are no further comments or questions on that provision, I think the next one is going down. I think that's all. Then it takes us to where we broke off on Thursday. So we're on page 14. And this deals with traffic, building, and safety requirements. And under, I believe that this is captured here, the building and safety matters. The applicant had a concern that there had been a reference in the fire department's memo about trim board and what could be used and what couldn't be. And during the course of the hearings, it was clarified that it was that the wall that was closest to another building. And so the applicant had just said, except as otherwise set forth in this decision. So with that introductory, I have no issue unless the board has any questions or comments with that exception.
No, that's fine.
All right. And then if you move on to the next page, on page 15, well, I guess just to make certain that I hit some of these to make certain that the board is in agreement with, just for the closure of Hancock Street, that any closure required of Hancock Street is to be coordinated with fire, police, and DPW. Are there any other departments that should be included on that?
I don't believe so.
Okay, very good. Construction fencing is simply just that it's to be secured so it doesn't blow out into the way. And then in paragraph F, you'll see the redlining there. And this deals with the tree removal and parking meters. And the applicant has suggested that the way to resolve the trees is to have for the applicant to consult with the tree warden to reach a mutually agreeable plan regarding the trees that are being removed from the sidewalk on Middle Street. And then the applicant would replace any parking meters temporarily made unusable during construction and to reimburse the city in accordance with section 22-229 of the ordinance. And so they struck from that the requirement that it should be replaced with alternate with equivalent tree sizes. And I think that that may have arisen from Bill's comment that there was a concern that you would have trees that would be impacting the sidewalk or the building.
yes, we talked about that, and I'm not sure the actual trees that are there now, which I consider public shade trees, would be going back with the finished project, and in negotiations with tree warden, who really owns those. Maybe those trees, that equivalent trees, could be planted somewhere else in the city. But I think it's best to leave that up to the tree warden and let him decide how he wants to deal with that.
Good.
All right.
If I may, just one quick thing. On the fence, it says for firmly secured. I guess that's okay. I'm just concerned. The fence is a problem with me because we watch it down Main Street. It migrates all over the place. And it becomes a problem with traffic. So that's why on Middle Street, I'm really concerned, but it does say securely, firmly secured. So I think that'll be good. That means it's got to be fastened to the pavement, right? So I think that'll be good. I'm sorry.
Okay. Moving on.
Okay, moving on. Could you scroll? Yeah, so with respect to L, so it's 1L, relative to final architectural plans. The only note on the end of that paragraph is just that, and this picks up, I think, with what we just spoken to previously, that the architectural plans shall also reflect the exterior walls will be designed to meet fire protection requirements of the building code, including brick and cement board, siding and trim, as to be noted on the approved plans and consistent with the architectural plans reviewed by the board. I think that addresses the comments that were made before, but if the board has any questions relative to.
Hey, Flo.
No.
Okay, the health department matters. Those were largely just consistent with the health department letter that was submitted, and there was no further comments by the applicant on those. There was nothing further on the stormwater, and then the only points that were going back and forth were on the surety and covenants, and how the board wanted to have that worded. The applicant had proposed that the project would be that they would require the general contractor to have in place a performance bond for the full payment of the construction contract, and that the city would also be listed as an obligee on the bonds. I don't know if the city, or if the board rather, is also requiring any sort of to be named as an additional insured, or in terms of what they need for proof of that the applicant has complied with that, and who to provide such compliance documentation to.
Greg, you have anything to weigh in on this? This sometimes falls kind of by the planning board rules.
Well, I think it typically kind of follows analogous situations of other larger projects. And I'm not sure if there's another section that also deals with bonding that's required by the Department of Public Works. So I think in general, that's just kind of a question of what was past practice. And I don't know if, Bill, you're familiar with this as well in terms of what's typically required, for bonding for somebody that's installing or connecting to public utility and the like.
Yeah, I know there's a bond required, but I'm not sure what that bond is, Greg. I don't know what the details are on that anymore.
So it's that 2455 to 60 in this code of ordinances. I have that.
Mr. Chairman, I can address that if you'd like.
Yes, please.
There is a specific bond requirement when you do work in a sidewalk or a public way. And our intention would be that the bond that we would have for the project, which would be in the millions of dollars because it's the entire cost of the project, would cover that, more than cover any liability that you would have for a smaller bond with regard to the work in the public way or the sidewalk. So it doesn't make sense to us to have an additional bond when we've got this general project bond in place. And so we'd suggest that this makes the most sense to do it this way and the most efficient way of dealing with it.
So where in this does it detail this bond you're speaking of?
That is in the waivers.
It's in the way, well, yeah, but you're asking us to waive, like, what is it, 24, 55, 57, 58, and 60?
I'd have to pull up the number, but
No, it was, I think I have it right here. It was 2159A. Is that what you said? Or 2158A?
right, which was only the bonding requirement. We aren't asking for a waiver of the insurance requirements that are in that section, but just for the bonding, and that the bonding be under this provision instead. So there would be security. It just would be under the general contract instead of having all of these different entities such as the planning board weighing in, the DPW weighing in, just having it be part of the contractor bond, which is
Yeah, but
typical.
That's two different things, I believe. I'll defer to Catherine maybe. The builder's bond, performance bond is different than the liability bond of tearing up the street to the city. That's a bond to guarantee he finishes your project. Where the bonds under 2158 talk about guaranteeing that public property would be repaired in the event of a problem.
And that would be part of the project. Obviously, the contractor would be doing any work. And so it would be part of the project to make sure that the sidewalks or anything else that was damaged or destroyed was brought to a condition that was satisfactory to the city. And obviously, again, the city would have the ability not to grant an occupancy permit if they didn't feel that it was done satisfactory. And we wouldn't release the bond until we were certain of that. And the city is named as an obligee under the bond, so you have rights under the bond directly against the contractor also.
Who, Greg, maybe Greg knows, who typically reviews these bonds prior to construction to make sure they have, enough coverage and?
I can tell you just, it's not very typical with many planning board projects because there is so much at stake with typically lot development. There's actually a choice of what the developer would like to enter into. And most often it's associated with a covenant not to convey or not to construct. So, very rarely we might have a situation where there's some remaining work to be done, but there's a desire to start moving towards, for instance, lot development in a subdivision, in which case an estimate would be provided by the applicant's engineer, reviewed by city engineer and public works to determine whether or not it was an adequate amount that would be bonded. And then it's reviewed by the treasurer's office as well.
Right, but that would be under that ordinance, code of ordinance, which if we waive, I still feel like that we lose control.
Well, under the code, I think it's actually through public works, and that's a little bit different for public utility and street work. In a planning board scenario, it's typically private development that may be turned over to the city at some point, but securing that work to be done, that there'll be adequacy of water, sewer, drain, road access prior to development. So it's a little bit, we've got a couple of different things that we're talking about, and the ones that are, I think, being requested to be waived are more associated with what public works typically requires for bonding for folks working in public ways. Stephanie,
Is it possible to add language in that just assures, to Joe's point, that assures that this isn't just for the building, it'll cover all street openings and infrastructures? That way, if it doesn't, then we can be looked at and we say, no, you need to provide the second bond to get over this hurdle. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I hear what you're saying. I think the concern on that is, or what we don't know at this point is, what is the construction contract saying?
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, if the
Right, but if the contractor,
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, if the contractor's saying, well, this isn't part of our work, so we're not covering, our bond doesn't cover this.
Then the Y would have to come up with whoever's doing the work in the street. If it's somebody different, not another contract, then the Y would have to provide that separate bond, and we'd be covered with the language. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know if
This, Chairman, this is Tara Mizrahi. Can I speak?
Sure.
So to help a little, I actually agree with what Bill just said. We won't have a separate contractor doing the site work, but if we did, that is fine. If there is a separate contractor, not through the GC, they would have to pull their own bond. That's not going to happen. But just so people understand what needs to happen at closing is, if the full scope isn't incorporated into the scope, then the building department is not going to approve a building permit for us. So that's one way to make sure that the full scope is covered. But then the other way to make sure that, there are two ways to make sure that this actually gets picked up as part of the closing, is that, as I understand, the city of Gloucester is involved in what's called mass docs, which is basically the state has an attorney who, for closing, covers the city's interests in the project, because you are also funding part of this project. So they're wrapped into all of the closing. As part of the closing, what we need to do is go through every single condition in this comp permit and explain how we are meeting it before we can close on the property. So when we get to this section, it's going to say that we need to do this type of bond. We need to show that the city is listed as a multiple obligee on those bonds, and that covers the full scope of the contract. So I think we are providing through this what we need. We certainly can tweak the language as we're talking about here, but I do think that everything that people have talked about right now is covered as part of this.
We're not partnership and we're not obligee. So you are right, but so isn't Bill. But we'll handle that at the end. Don't have to go all the way that, because before we sign anything, I'm sure we're going to change this quite a bit. Because she's right, we'll get our attorneys, because we are not a partnership, and we're going to expect all these bonds, and Bill is right on those bonds. And whether you have a different contractor or someone else coming to do any kind of utility or whatever may happen to be, you are responsible for the bonding. I'm not worried about that right now in the litigation right now. That's what we have our attorneys for, like we did when we did Gloucester Crossings. So Tara can do it the way she wants to, like she said, and then we can move forward, because don't even go on little litigations here and there, because we're going to rip this apart anyway. So I'm not worried about it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
this is Deborah Ellison. We are fine with putting in the language that Bill suggested, that in the event you determine that the bond that we're supplying is not sufficient, that we'll be required to get an additional bond. So we're fine with that language. I think
Yeah,
that
that's perfect. Thank you, Deb. Thank you.
Okay.
And if I just could, the language that's redlined there, that actually had been language that originally was in Harbor Village. And somewhat to Tara's point, that became a problem. And I think they had to come back and amend that language, because when they were working through the closing with the mass docs, the provisions that had carried over, and then I went back and looked at Harbor Village. I believe they had to go and modify that. So alternate language is needed. So if the board is satisfied with working with this base and then adding in, if Bill, if you could provide again what the amendments to the underlining language, or just the concepts.
But the concept would be is, as the chairman mentioned, that the bonds usually in projects tend to go to completing the building. And if this bond that gets presented to us doesn't cover utilities, drainage, street work, and sidewalk work, then they would have to provide a bond that did so.
So, yeah, because the bond says for the full amount of the construction contract, but it ought to say to include the things Bill just mentioned.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
Who do we have?
Greg Cadamatore.
Yes,
I'm
Greg.
thinking maybe it's solved by fleshing out what the project means. And maybe that's something parenthetic in that first sentence that says the project, including the building construction, all site work and utility work, just elaborating what that is.
Okay, the term project itself is defined at the introductory paragraph of the decision. So But if you want it to.
Yeah,
to
somewhere
further
in here,
in
just
there, yeah.
identifying all of the work that's associated with the development.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. And would there be a time frame that we should put on that?
I'd be prior to issuance of building permit.
Okay,
Wow.
that's good. That, I thought it would be that.
Would you, Mr. Chairman? A thought on that, Mr. Chairman?
No, yeah, that's what I thought you were gonna say. I thought she was looking for an ending date, but
No, it's
No,
looking for the when the drop dead has to be provided. What I would suggest then is keeping that there, but then also referencing it in the conditions of prior to issuance of building permit, and then to make specific reference to subpart I then.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Deborah. I
Yes.
think that there may be some issues with having it prior to the building permit versus prior to construction, because we do need the building permit in hand before we close. And I'm not certain whether all of these contracts and bonds will be in place prior to that. And I guess I would ask Tara to weigh in on that.
This is Tara Mizrahi. You're right. It all happens right around the last 2 days of closing that all of this comes in. So I agree, if it could be prior to construction start, that would allow the closing to happen in the proper order.
So my objection to that would be is the city would have no way to assure that that has been done. Once we issue a permit, we've issued the permit. Construction's assumed to be able to start the next day.
So actually, I have so I would love to deal with it the same way we dealt with the regulatory agreement in the last one, so that we provide you draft performance payments and lien bonds prior to issuance of the permit. So in substantially final form, if we could do the same thing, that's completely doable.
And this is Deborah again, and I point out, Bill, that in number 2, it says no construction shall begin until these requirements have been met. So even if the building permit is granted to us, there is a condition in this decision that says that we cannot begin construction without having provided those bonds.
Okay, I guess I'll refer to Stephanie for those comments.
Well, the other way to address, as opposed to prior to commencement of construction, for closing purposes, would be for the building inspector just to issue a letter saying a building permit will issue upon the receipt of, and then it could say, you know, the general contractor's contract, you know, having the city be listed as a multiple obligee, you know, for the full extent.
Mr. Chairman, this is Deborah. I think that could cause problems with the closing. I don't know whether or not DHCD would accept that letter. We know that they generally require a building permit in hand. So that would be my concern with substituting a letter for that.
yeah, I would think if the wording in 2 should be able to cover that. You know, until these, no construction shall begin until these replacement requirements are met. I think that does it.
So one other question is, you'll be looking for the building permit before you actually look for the demolition permit for your financing, correct?
Yes, this is Tara Mizrahi. We really need a building permit for everything. The demolition permit alone won't really let us get to closing. So yes, we'd be looking for the full permit.
No, I was thinking the other way around, to give you the full permit and then not issue the demolition permit until we had everything in place. That way you couldn't take the building down, which in essence means you couldn't start construction in the new building until you provided, till we had everything in place. I'm just throwing it out there to see if that might be some way to solve the issue.
If the building permit itself didn't say, you know, here's a building permit, but you still have to get a demo permit, then it would be fine. Like the lenders want to know that there's,
No,
I don't know. Yeah,
I
go
use
ahead.
two separate permits. You need a demolition permit to demolish the building.
Yep,
And you need a building permit to build it. They're not conditioned upon each other.
okay.
So.
I don't know if that would, oh, sorry, sir.
Okay, I just
I don't
say,
know if that would work. I feel like we need to come up with language aside from that, because I don't want us to get in trouble come closing where both of us are not getting what we need. I feel like we can work this out through the
Okay.
language somehow.
just trying to see if that would work. That's
Yep.
fine.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, let's use 2 to get the wording down that would prevent construction until everything's provided. We should be.
Joe, can I have a question? I'm sorry, but you keep saying lenders. Are you talking about just the personal banks you're going through or the state?
Both.
Okay, because I know the state is not going to have, you can get funding with the state without a permit because they know the process. So if it's something else, then we can work with you because we've done it before. So that's why I was having a question. But like he said, we can word it where you can get your permit, but I'm not issuing a demolition permit until everything's in place. So, and we can work on that. I mean, and if through the state and everything else, they know, they're used to that. And I just put a text into Chip too. And like you said, we'll get the mass cap and all of that because the fact is we're also going to be given money. So they know that definitely we're going to want to make that happen. So we can work that out. Like I said, we're going to work that out. You can put right now, issue the permit and not the demolition. That's fine. And you can go forward because you know what, before everything's all done, you'll have all permits anyway. So I'm not worried about it.
Well, with 2, if it says no construction shall begin, Bill, and you've issued a building permit, you could always do a cease and desist if you don't have your bonds, right? So you still have some leverage over the project with the language and as it's written, I think, in 2, right?
If the language is there that cease and dismiss and Bill has the authority and we issue a permit unless we see the bonds, then yes, we can cease and dismiss.
Yeah, I do agree with the chairman and the mayor there. I think number 2 does have enough teeth to protect us on that. I was only offering up the other one as a way to maybe help a little more benefits to the applicants. But I think number 2 does cover what we need to cover. And I am happy with that.
Yeah, no, that's simpler.
Okay, we could also put in, similar to Ms. Schlichty's comment, we could put in a suspend because you don't want to say cease and desist perhaps because nothing should have started because it was prior to commencement of construction. So a suspension.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're going to go to the state with you. We're going to come with, we're going to be with you, the letter of support and all of that. So you know what I mean? Yeah, that'd be perfect, Stephanie. That'll be a perfect verbiage.
Okay, and the remaining clauses after that one gets tweaked are just the standard amendment, which requires that if the applicant desires to change any aspect, they come back to the board to request a modification in accordance with the procedure that's set out in the 40B regulations. Expiration, if the applicant doesn't make use of comprehensive permit within 3 years, unless there's good cause that delayed it. And then just the waiver list that we'll get to in 1 second. But before we do that, I did want to, I'm sorry, I overlooked this because it was accept change and I went past it. But Deb, if you could scroll back up to page 6, just because this had a lot of discussion time at the last hearing. And I think that this language that Deb and I have come to agree upon will satisfy the board, but I want to make certain of that. So it's under the regulatory conditions B4, and this dealt with the affordability and perpetuity, and then the statements that were made about, well, what happens if there's a foreclosure or a potential foreclosure situation. And after the last hearing, I went back and looked back at just prior affordable housing restrictions and other projects that I've been involved in. They're all, as Tara said, they're mass docs documents, so they're typically the same document. And looking to see how that situation works out. In the event that the senior lender thinks that there's going to be a foreclosure situation, they're to give notice. There's 60 days, and during which time a potential substitute person can step in to take over. And then it gets to, if after that 60 days it doesn't happen, then you can kind of get into this, is there a way to play with the affordability or the numbers to make it work? And all of that, it's somewhat complicated, but it's also very much driven by the regulatory agreements, the affordable housing restriction, which is a restriction that's given by the developer, and it's granted to the senior lender, and then how that dovetails into the regulatory agreement. So the proposed language change, it's really in the bottom, the last sentence there, to provide that the additional restrictions, and those would be the greater affordability. So 9 units at 50% AMI, 9 units at 30% AMI, and then the balance 26 units would be set for households not to exceed 60% AMI. So those are termed the additional restrictions. And so as Deb and I have worked on this, and the board should consider, the additional restrictions are to remain in place for 50 years from the time the project's placed in service, subject to the terms, conditions, and requirements of the project's recorded regulatory agreement as administered by DHCD or successor subsidizing agency, and any recorded affordable housing restriction for the project as recorded, and that's recorded at the registry of deeds. So I think that what it does is it really, because if the board here were to undercut what's required by the affordable housing restriction, the applicant would just be coming back to you prior to closing. And so the language here just basically secures that there will be these greater affordability provisions, but they're also going to be, administered within the regulatory agreement and the affordable housing restriction that will be placed on the property. So I don't know if the board has any further comments or questions on that, or has better ideas than what I had suggested.
No, that's fine. So the other piece of paper I got with regards to from DHCD affordable housing restrictions, which the city will be a party to, that's what you're referencing, I believe?
Yes, but actually the city is not a party of the affordable housing restriction.
Okay.
It's given by the borrower, so the developer, and it's given, for basically the benefit of the senior lender. Then there's riders to that, typically that like the senior lender, what maybe it's a Mass Housing Partnership or whoever it is, and the borrower both sign. But this is not a document that the city or the board signs on to.
Right. My only question was the last sentence on that. Financial infeasibility shall be determined by the senior mortgage holder in its sole discretion after consultation with the holders. When we were talking last time, we were talking about a winding out process and all that. Just sounds like the senior mortgage holder has sole discretion.
If you,
that might be true. I'm just asking.
I think, are you referring to what had been proposed language, or was that an excerpt from the?
This was the excerpt from the DHCD restrictions. It just talked about the process of financially infeasibility. I mean, I'm okay with it. I was just curious how it would unwind it. It sounded like it just gave all the discretion to the senior lender.
Chairman, this is Tara Mizrahi. May I speak for a minute?
Sure.
Yes, so I think it's deferring only to the first mortgage lender to kind of say there often are subordinate lenders that that may want to have a say in all of this because they aren't getting kind of the cash flow after the first mortgage lender. The intention is really to say the first mortgage lender gets to have a say. After that, it doesn't matter. The rest of the people behind those lenders, you are at risk anyway. If you don't kind of get paid, then so be it. That was kind of a risk before. We don't want to let our affordability go, because you guys aren't getting paid. But the first mortgage lender is important. But as you represented the holders, I actually I'd have to go back to the language, Stephanie, but I think the holders are the holders of the subordinate loans, which would be a city loan. So I do think the city is at the table in those discussions if they are part of MassDocs, which I understood that they were. That might be wrong, but I thought that Gloucester is part of MassDocs. So they are still at the table, but it's really just to say, not everybody can come and say, we're not getting our money, only the large lender that's at the table.
I understand the participatory lender piece and the senior mortgage holder. That doesn't bother me at all. My question was about like the city who has put money into this project. You folks had described that they would be part of the unwinding discussion.
Correct.
And it doesn't sound that way here.
Greg, is the city of Gloucester part of MassDocs? I understood that it was.
I have no idea.
That's the question for.
I can't confirm that. I'm not sure.
Okay. My understanding, I think through Jill or Jamie, was that you are part of the MassDocs program, which means you are one of those quote holders. And we can confirm that.
Okay.
If not, maybe there is a way to get you to be part of one of, at the table, but I think you are one of those holders from my understanding.
Alrighty. Stephanie?
I think that as was described by Tara, that it is correct that the shall be the only one. It's the relationship of the senior lender to the subordinate lenders. And again, that clause, it's in paragraph 21 of the affordable housing restriction. And what it provides is that it says, notwithstanding anything herein to the contrary, if the holder of record of a first mortgage granted to a state or national bank, state or federal savings loan association, cooperative bank, etc., shall acquire the property by reason of foreclosure or similar remedial action, the provisions of such mortgage, or upon the conveyance of the property in lieu of foreclosure, and provided that the holder has given the holders and the Secretary of EOHHS no less than 60 days prior written notice of its intention to foreclose upon its mortgage or to accept a conveyance of the property in lieu of foreclosure, to attempt structure a workout or other arrangement, conveyance in lieu of foreclosure or similar remedial action, and the Secretary of the EOHHS has failed within 60 days to locate a purchaser that subject to the restrictions herein, then except as provided below, the rights and restrictions shall not apply to such mortgage holder. And then it goes on to say that there's this workout, if you will. And so at that point, that's when the senior lender has the ability to terminate the agreement only if it's financially infeasible to maintain the level of affordability, and then they get into the restrictions.
Okay.
So it really is a situation that I don't think that the board has a place to condition how that works out here, because it's going to be guided by the affordable housing restriction in and of itself, unfortunately.
No, that's the language we had heard before. That's good. Okay. Now do we have any waiver changes?
Yes, just I think they're a little bit more streamlined. And Deb, could you pull those up as well? So this is the waiver list that you've seen before, that we worked through before. And I believe the only outstanding question, and it gets back to our discussion here that we had on sureties, is under the general provisions, and the applicant has requested, they've revised what their request is to just be requesting a waiver under sections 2158A and 2160 as it relates to a posting a bond, and 2160 deals with the release of that. And so what they've requested is that if you waived and the bonds and security are going to be governed by the comprehensive permit, which dovetails into somewhat the conversation that we had before.
So that, if we agree with that, that would tie, we're covered back on what we discussed
Right,
in the permit, the decision.
right. They had a greater number of waiver requests for bonds and whatnot, and they removed them, and it's only now 58A and 60.
And you feel that's fine?
If they don't think that they need the other waivers, then yes, I mean, it's up to them to determine what they're seeking a waiver from, otherwise they're subject to. So I think that the revised language of the surety would cover it under what they're seeking here, which is just bonds for work in the way.
We need to add language in here, though, that somewhat says to the extent, and to the extent governed by the decision, because you're going to add some language right into the decision that says if it's determined that further bonding is needed beyond the general bond for the project, that'll be added in. So I just don't know if we need a modification of the.
Yeah, there is just language in there, the last sentence. I can make it more robust, but it just says to be governed by the.
Oh, to be governed by the comprehensive permit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll cover it as long as the other part's done. Okay, any other changes?
No, there really were no other changes. The rest were pretty much just streamlining what had been discussed before.
The only other thing, Mr. Chairman, this is Deborah, we did correct the open space per dwelling unit numbers.
Correct,
I
yeah.
think everything else is the same.
Okay. Alrighty, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna allow, if there's any public testimony at this point. I don't know that we have any yeah, we do. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak in regard to this project, whether for or against, or any questions? Please raise your hand to be recognized. Anyone wish, let me get on the attendees here. Anyone wishing to speak? This is going to be the last, probably the last opportunity for public testimony. I see none. We have 3 attendees, none raised their hand. So I would say we are moving on there. Procedurally, Stephanie. So would we approve the waiver list and then at some point vote on the comprehensive permit? Is that the right process? Or?
I would suggest that exactly, that you move to approve the waivers that have been requested by the applicant. I would just put in the motion as revised and to be finalized in final form, because what you've seen is a red line, but and then move to approve the project subject to conditions. And once the public hearing closes, you have 40 days to issue the decision. So there are some minor points in here. So if you want to close the public hearing, you just get those conditions just to make certain that the board's okay with them. And the board can share that with the applicant. So if there is a further question, you could have a work session or something and do it in an open meeting and talk about it. But you could close the public hearing and have that completed to allow just the finalization of the documents. And there's just one additional document. I just wanted to make certain that everything was reviewed here this evening, but Exhibit B to the board's decision would be a listing of all of the materials that have been submitted. So I think that we have probably everything that's on the website, so I can compile that list and perhaps share it with Allison or Greg to make certain that I've captured all the public record that exists that was submitted.
So if we, so if I close the public hearing, allow some board, any comments from the board, and then it would be appropriate to have a motion to approve the condition, the waivers, subject to the red line, or how are we gonna, or do we need to wait for our documents to be all updated?
No, you have, like I said, you have 40 days to issue the decision. And so the you're approving the waivers. And it's just a matter of getting a final clean version of the waiver list. So you're not taking under consideration, you're not receiving new testimony as to whether to grant or deny a waiver. So if the board's comfortable with the waivers that have been requested and in granting them, you can vote that. That's not a problem.
Okay, thank you. Is
Mr.
there any members of the board that would like to make any comments or ask questions at this point?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question about the process? This is Deborah.
Yes, Deborah.
So my concern is with when the decision is actually going to be final and whether you will have to have another meeting to make it final. It appears to me that there could be a vote this evening on the decision, which is pretty much in final form, but for a few amendments that we've discussed. And I believe if the board agrees with those, the board could vote on not only the waivers, but also the decision. And then it would be only a matter of that being signed later on by the board without having to hold another meeting. I do recognize you have a significant amount of time to draft the decision, and we certainly appreciate that this board has gone over and above having meetings for us and trying to get on the schedule that we're at. But if we could have the decision sooner rather than later, that would certainly be helpful to us. Thank you.
Any board members like to comment at this time?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Al.
I'd just like you to know that the mayor has her hand raised.
Oh, sure. You let her in?
Sure.
Yes, just so you know that we are working with the oh, I just forgot the name. I'm sorry, Mass Talks. Yeah, Jamie's very certified. We did with the other one, so we're all set on that one. So in case you were hesitant because you wanted to make sure, but we are, Tara. Thank you. So that should make it easier too.
Thank you, Your Honor. Board members, a comment.
Well, I mean, I think we kind of are ready to vote. I mean, I think we've worked through all of our questions, our issues. I mean, we always get decisions after our votes, right? So I would be prepared to approve the waivers and approve the project at this point. Maybe I'm just tired of all these special meetings. No offense, everyone.
Michael?
Yeah, I'm tired too. No, I would, I feel like Catherine just stated, and I would, not being an attorney, I would always defer to our attorney, Stephanie, just for any comments that you have, make sure and just protect me as a non-attorney if I'm voting, to make sure that we can get the correct items in the list and so on like that. But I'm happy to move forward as long as that's a good decision with the waivers and the decision this evening, just to continue to promote this as fast as we can.
Yep. Keep in mind, when we vote for the comprehensive permit tonight, we're voting for the permit in general. Our written decision can be tweaked or will be finalized before we sign it, but
Right.
we're not like approving line by line or anything. So
Yeah, so
but
for that reason, I'm good. I'm absolutely good to do both.
Peter or Adria, any comments at this point? Are we good?
I'm good.
Just a fly on the wall.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to close the public hearing. And I'm going to entertain a motion with regard to the waiver list.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we approve the waivers as revised and as most recently revised and presented to us tonight for the project at 71 Middle Street.
Motion made. You're muted.
I would second that.
Motion by Catherine Schlichty, seconded by Michael Nyman to approve the waiver list as adjusted tonight, subject to the final draft version. Roll call vote.
Miss Lickby,
Yes.
Miss Pratt,
What do you call 911?
Yes.
Mr. Diamond,
Yes.
and Mr. Canavo.
Yes, Joe will give you mouth to mouth. Don't worry.
I'll get that up. Mr. Parisi,
I vote yes.
sorry about that.
So you've heard our decision. We've approved the waiver list as adjusted over these many times. And so now we're gonna, Catherine, do you have the listing in front of you?
Well, I was just gonna, you mean how, I was just gonna approve the application of Middle Street Housing LLC for
So we
comprehensive.
need to approve a comprehensive permit under 40B as it's written. Okay, that's all.
Okay.
Mr.
Chairman, I-
Chairman, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Peter, we need to see you to vote.
Oh, yeah, Peter. Come on in, buddy. Put your shirt on. There you go.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval of the application of Middle Street Housing LLC for a comprehensive permit under 40B with the conditions as discussed and presented for its project at 71 Middle Street in Gloucester.
I would second that.
Motion made by Catherine Schlichty, seconded by Michael Nyman to approve a comprehensive permit subject to section 40B. We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Pratt,
Yes.
Mr. Nyman,
Yes.
Mr. Canavo,
Yes.
Ms. Slickby,
Yes.
and Mr. Parisi.
Yes. We've heard our decision. We've approved a comprehensive permit, always subject to our drafting of the final decision and signing those, which we will do as quickly as possible, so we don't hold you up in your applications. I want to thank everybody, Stephanie especially. You
Yeah,
helped
thanks for
us
your
out
help.
a lot. I don't know where we'd be. And the applicants have been great, cooperative, getting us what we needed. And everybody's just happy about seeing this project go forward. So I thank the members who are willing to put the extra time in. You will get a call at some point. We'll have to sign this thing. And everybody it'll probably be at the office and we'll stop in to sign it.
Mr. Chairman, if I can make a suggestion,
Yes,
would it be possible to bring it up on an agenda just for everybody to make sure everybody's reviewed it and sign it at a meeting?
well, that would push us to January 14. Is that?
Will this decision be ready and drafted by then?
Attorney-
90% complete now.
Okay, okay, never mind.
Yeah, I'd rather get it to them as soon as possible. Everyone will get it sent to them to review before you're called down to sign it. I want everybody to have a chance to make sure it is what it is. And I'll see you all in next year, I guess.
Yeah, everyone have nice holidays.
You guys have been, you've been amazing. Thank you so much
Merry
for all this
Christmas.
time, really. Thank you.
Very welcome.
I want you to be ready for the next meeting.
Okay.
I need a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move for adjournment.
Second that motion for
Made
adjournment.
and seconded to adjourn. Roll call.
Mr. Nyman,
Yes.
Mr. Canavo,
Yes.
Ms. Slickty,
Yes.
Ms. Pratt,
Yes.
Mr. Parisi.
Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you
holidays.
so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. I
Good luck.
learned a lot. Bye, everyone. Be safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations.
Happy
Yep.
holidays.
Merry
Happy
Christmas,
holidays.
all.
Hanukkah.
Happy, merry, merry.
You too.
Feliz Navidad.